May our Father, Messiah, and Holy Spirit be with us. I believe I'm on 2 Kings. Amen. Yep. After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Ahijah fell through the lattice in the upper chamber at Samaria and was injured. So he sent messengers whom he instructed, go inquire of Baal Zebub, the mighty one of Ekron, or thou shalt recover from this injury. But an angel of our Father in heaven said to Elijah the Tishbite, go and confront the messengers of the king of Samaria and say to them, is there no Elohim in Israel that you go to inquire of Baal Zebub, the mighty one of Ekron? Assuredly, thus said our Father in heaven, you shall not rise from the bed you are lying on, but you shall die. And Elijah went. Just fall like that. Okay, I'll just leave it like that. And it says he went, and Elijah went. The messengers returned to Ahijah, and he asked, why have you come back? They answered him, a man came toward us and said to us, go back to the king who sent you, and say to him, thus said our Father in heaven, is there Elohim in Israel that you must send to inquire of Baal Zebub, the mighty one of Ekron? Assuredly you shall rise from the bed. Assuredly you shall not rise from the bed you are lying on, but shall die. What sort of man is it? He asked them, who came out toward you and said these things to you? A hairy man, they replied, with a leathern belt tied around his waist. That's Elijah the Tishbite, he said. Then he sent to him a captain of 50 with his 50 men. He climbed up to him and found him sitting at the top of the hill. Man of Elohim, he said to him, by order of the king, come down. Elijah replied to the captain of the 50, if I am a man of Elohim, let fire come down from heaven and consume you with your 50 men. And fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. The king sent to him another captain with his 50 men, and he addressed him as follows, man of Elohim, by order of the king, come down at once. But Elijah answered him, if I am a man of Elohim, But Elijah answered him, if I am a man of Elohim, let fire come down from heaven and consume you with your 50 men. And fire of Elohim came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. Then he sent a third captain. He just sent them out there to die. And 50 with his 50 men. The third captain of 50 climbed to the top, knelt before Elijah, and implored him, saying, O man of Elohim, please have regard for my life and the lives of these 50 servants of yours. Already fires come from heaven and consumed the first 2 captains of 50 and their men. I beg you have regard for my life. Then the angel of our Father in heaven said to Elijah, Eliyahu, go down with him. Do not be afraid of him. So he rose and went down with him to the king. He said to him, because you sent messengers to inquire Baal Zebub, the mighty one of Ekron, as if there was no Elohim in Israel, whose word you could seek, assuredly you shall not rise from the bed which you are lying on, but you shall die. And Ahijah died according to the word of our Father in heaven, that Eliyahu had spoken. Jeroboam succeeded him as king in the 2nd year of King Jeroboam, son of Jehoshaphat of Yehuda. For he had no son. The other events of Uzziah's reign and his actions are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. When our Father in heaven was about to take Eliyahu up to heaven in a whirlwind, Eliyahu and Elijah had set out from Gilgal. Eliyahu said to Elijah, stay here, for our Father in heaven has sent me on to Bethel, as our Father in heaven lives, and as you live, said Elijah, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. Disciples of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elijah and said to him, do you know that our Father in heaven will take your master away from you today? From your head? Today he replied, I know it. He said, I know it too, be silent. Then Eliyahu said to him, Elijah, stay here, for our Father in heaven has sent me on to Jericho. As our Father in heaven lives, and as you live, said Elijah, I will not leave you. So they went on to Jericho. The disciples of the prophets who were at Jericho came over to Elijah and said to him, do you know that our Father in heaven will take your master away from you today? He replied, I know it too, be silent. Wow, this is so beautiful. Eliyahu said to him, Stay here, for our father in heaven has sent me onto the Jordan. As our father never lives and as you live, I will not leave you. He said, and the two of them went on. 50 men of the disciples of the prophets followed and stood by at a distance from them. As the two of them stopped at the Jordan, thereupon Eliyahu took his mantle, and rolling it up, he struck the water. It divided to the right and left, so that the two of them crossed over on dry land. As they were crossing, Eliyahu said to Elijah, Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you? Elijah answered, Let a double portion of your spirit pass on to me. Let two-thirds of your spirit pass on to me. You have asked a difficult thing, he said. If you see me as I am being taken from you, this will be granted to you. If not, it will not. As they kept on walking and talking, a fiery chariot with fiery horses suddenly appeared and separated one from the other. And Eliyahu went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah saw it, and they cried out, Oh, Father, Israel's chariots and horsemen. When he could no longer see him, he grasped his garments and rent them in two. He picked up Eliyahu's mantle, which had dropped from him, and he went back and stood on the back of the Jordan, taking the mantle which had dropped from Eliyahu. He struck the water and said, Where is our Father in heaven, the Elohim of Eliyahu? As he too struck the water, it parted to the right and to the left, and Elijah crossed over. When the disciples of the prophets at Jericho saw him from a distance, they exclaimed, The spirit of Eliyahu has settled on Elijah, and they went to meet him and bowed low before him to the ground. They said to him, Your servants have 50 able men with them. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the spirit of our Father in heaven has carried him off and cast him upon some mountain or in some valley. Do not send them, he replied. But they kept pressing him for a long time until he said, Send them. So they sent out 50 men who searched for 3 days but did not find him. They came back to him while he was still in Jericho, and he said to them, I told you not to go. The men of the town said to Elijah, Look, the town is a pleasant place to live in, as my master can see, but the water is bad and the land causes bereavement. He responded, Bring me a new dish and put salt in it. They brought it to him. He went to the spring and threw salt into it, and he said, Thus said our Father in heaven, I heal this water. No longer shall death and bereavement come from it. The water has remained wholesome to this day. Amen. In accordance with the word spoken by Elijah. From there he went up to Bethel. As he was going up the road, some little boys came out of the town and jeered at him, saying, Go away, bald head, go away, bald head. He turned around and looked at them and cursed them in the name of our Father in heaven. Thereupon 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mangled 42 of the children. He went on from there to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Samaria. Jeroboam, son of Ahab, became king of Israel and Samaria in the 18th year of King Jehoshaphat of Yehuda, and he reigned 12 years. He did what was displeasing to our Father in heaven, yet not like his father and mother, for he removed the pillars of Baal that his father had made. However, he clung to the sins which Jeroboam, son of Nebat, caused Israel to commit. He did not depart from them. Now King Mesha of Moab was a sheep breeder, and he used to pay as tribute to the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So King Jehoram promptly set out from Samaria and mustered all Israel. At the same time, he sent this message to King Jehoshaphat of Yehuda: The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you come with me to make war on Moab? He replied, I will go. I will do what you do. My troops shall be your troops. My horses shall be your horses. And he asked, Which route shall we take? Jeroboam replied, The road through the wilderness of Edom. So the king of Israel, the king of Yehuda, and the king of Edom set out, and they marched for 7 days until they rounded the tip of the Dead Sea, and there was no water left for the army or for the animals that were with them. Alas, cried the king of Israel, our Father in heaven has brought these 3 kings together, only to deliver them into the hands of Moab. But Jehoshaphat said, Isn't there a prophet of our Father in heaven here, though whom we may inquire of our Father in heaven? One of the courtiers of the king of Israel spoke up and said, Elijah, son of Shaphat, who poured water on the hands of Eliyahu, was here. The word of our Father in heaven was with him. Said Jehoshaphat. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. Elijah said to the kings of Israel, What have you to do with me? Go to your father's prophets or your mother's prophets. But the king of Israel said, Don't say that, for our Father in heaven has brought these 3 kings together only to deliver them into the hands of Moab. As our Father in heaven of hosts lives, whom I serve. Elijah answered, Were it not that I respect King Jehoshaphat of Yehuda, I wouldn't look at you or notice you. Now then, get me a musician. As the musician played, the hand of our Father in heaven came upon him, and he said, Thus said our Father in heaven, The wadi shall be full of pools. For thus said our Father in heaven, you shall see no wind, you shall see no rain, and yet the wadi shall be filled with water, and you and your cattle and your pack animals shall drink, and this is but a slight thing in the sight of our Father in heaven. For he will also deliver Moab into your hands. You shall conquer every fortified town and every splendid city. You shall fell every good tree, and stoop up all wells of water. In every fertile field you shall ruin with stones. And in the morning, when it was time to present the meal offering, water suddenly came from the direction of Edom, and the land was covered by the water. Meanwhile, the Moabites had heard that the kings were advancing to make war on them. Every man old enough to bear arms, from all those old enough to gird on a sword, rallied and they stationed themselves at the border. Next morning when they rose, the sun was shining over the water, and from the distance the water appeared to the Moabites as red as blood. That's blood, they said. The kings must have fought among themselves and killed each other. Not to the spoil Moab, they entered the Israelite camp, and the Israelites arose and attacked the Moabites, who fled before them. They advanced constantly, attacking the Moabites, and they destroyed the towns. Every man threw a stone into each fertile field, so that it was covered over, and they stopped up every spring and failed every I'm sorry, and failed every fruit tree. Only the walls of Hazareth were left. And then the slingers surrounded it and attacked it. Seeing that the battle was going against him, the king of Moab led an attempt of 700 swordsmen to break a way through to the king of Edom. But they failed, so he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him up on the wall as a burnt offering. A great wrath came upon Israel, so they withdrew from him and went back to their own land. A certain woman, the wife of one of the disciples of the prophets, cried out to Elijah, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know how your servant revered our Father in heaven. And now a creditor is coming to seize my 2 children as slaves. Elijah said to her, what can I do for you? Tell me, what have you in the house? She replied, your maidservant has nothing at all in the house except a jug of oil. Go, he said, and borrow vessels outside from all your neighbors, empty vessels, as many as you can. Then go in and shut the door behind you and your children, and pour oil into all those vessels, removing each one as it is filled. She went away and shut the door behind her and her children. They kept bringing vessels to her, and she kept pouring. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. He answered her, there are no more vessels, and the oil stopped. She came and told the man of Elohim, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your children can live on the rest. Amen. That is so beautiful. All praise to our Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's amazing right there to read. That's amazing. You got them set up for life like that. That's amazing. Yo, like all praise to our Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Just gotta have faith in him. Amen. One day Elijah visited Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to have a meal. And whenever he passed by, he would stop there for a meal. When she said to her husband, I am sure it is a holy man of Elohim who comes this way regularly. Let us make a small enclosed upper chamber and place a bed, a table, a chair, and a lampstand there for him, so that he can stop there whenever he comes to us. One day he came there, he retired to the upper chamber and lay down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, call that Shunammite woman. He called her, and she stood before him. He said to him, tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What can we do for you? Can we speak in your behalf to the king or to the army commander? She replied, I live among my own people. What then can be done for her? He asked. The fact is that Gehazi, she has no son, and her husband is old. Call her. He said. He called her, and she stood in the doorway. And Elijah said, at this season, next year, you will be embracing a son. She replied, please, my master, man of Elohim, do not delude your maidservant. The woman conceived and bore a son at the same season the following year, as Elijah had assured her. The child grew up. One day he went out to his father among the reapers. Suddenly he cried to his father, oh, my head, my head. He said to his servant, carry him to his mother. He picked him up and brought him to his mother, and the child sat on her lap until noon, and he died. She took him up and laid him on the bed of the men of Elohim and left him and closed the door. Then she called to her husband, please send me one of the servants and one of the she donkeys, so I can carry to the men of Elohim and back. But he said, why are you going to him today? It is not a new moon nor a Sabbath. She answered, it's all right. She had the donkey saddled and said to her servant, urge the beast on, so that I don't slow down unless I tell you. She went on until she came to the men of Elohim on Mount Carmel. When the men of Elohim saw her from afar, he said to his servant Gehazi, there is that Shunammite woman. Go hurry toward her and ask her, how are you? How is your husband? How is the child? We are well, she replied. But when she came up to the men of Elohim on the mountain, she clasped his feet. Gehazi stepped forward to push her away, but the men of Elohim said, let her alone, for she is in bitter distress. and our Father in heaven has hidden it from me and has not told me. Then she said, Did I ask my master for a son? Didn't I say, Don't mislead me? He said to Gehazi, Tie up your skirts, take my staff in your hand, and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. And if anyone greets you, do not answer him. And place my staff on the face of the boy. But the boy's mother said, As our Father in heaven lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. So he arose and followed her. Gehazi had gone on before them, and had placed the staff on the boy's face. But there was no sound or response. He turned back to meet him and told him, The boy has not awakened. Elijah came into the house, and there was the boy laid out dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to our Father in heaven. Then he mounted the bed and placed himself over the child. He put his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands. As he bent over it, and the body of the child became warm, he stepped down, walked once up and down the room, then mounted and bent over him. Thereupon the boy sneezed 7 times, and the boy opened his eyes. Elijah called Gehazi and said, Call the Shunammite woman. And he called her. When she came to him, he said, Pick up your son. She came and fell at his feet and bowed low to the ground. Then she picked up her son and left. This is amazing. I mean, like this is so amazing. Like it's just like so beautiful to read. I can't even explain it. Elijah returned to Gilgal. There was a famine in the land, and the disciples of the prophets were sitting before him. He said to his servant, Set a large pot on the fire and cook a stew for the disciples of the prophets. Amen. So one of them went out into the fields to gather sprouts. He came across a wild vine and picked from it wild gourds, as many as his garment would hold. Then he came back and sliced them into the pot of stew. But they did not know what they were, and they served it for the men to eat. While they were still eating of the stew, they began to cry out, O man of Elohim, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat it. Fetch some flour, Elijah said. He threw it into the pot and said, Serve it to the people and let them eat. And there was no longer anything harmful in the pot. A man came from Baal Shalishah, and he brought the man of Elohim some bread of the first reaping, 20 loaves of barley bread and some fresh grain in his sack. And Elijah said, Give it to the people and let them eat. His attendant replied, How can I set this before 100 men? But he said, Give it to the people and let them eat. For thus said our Father in heaven, They shall eat and have some left over. So he set it before them, and when they had eaten, they had some left over, as our Father in heaven had said. It's like Messiah. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was important to his master and high in his favor. For through him our Father in heaven had granted victory to Aram. But the man, through a great warrior, was a leper. Once when the Arameans were out raiding, they carried off a young girl from the land of Israel, and she became an attendant to Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I hope our master could come before the prophet in Samaria. He will cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went and told his master just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, Go to the king of Israel, and I will send along a letter. He set out, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. He brought the letter to the king of Israel. It read, Now when his letter reaches you, know that I have sent my courtier Naaman to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. When the king of Israel read the letter, he rent his clothes and cried, Am I Elohim to deal with death or give life? That this fellow writes to me to cure a man of leprosy? Just see for yourselves that he is seeking a pretext against me. When Elijah the man of Elohim heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why have you rent your clothes? Let him come to me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel. Amen. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the door of Elijah's house. Elijah sent a messenger to say to him, Go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was angry and walked away. I thought he said he would surely come out to me and would stand and invoke our Father in heaven, his Elohim by name, and would wave his hand toward the spot and cure the affected part. Are not the Amana and the far part, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? I could bathe in them and be clean. And he stalked off in a rage. But his servants came forward and spoke to him, Sir, they said that the prophet told you to do something difficult. Would you not do it? How much more when he has only said to you, Bathe and be clean? So he went down and immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of Elohim had bidden, and his flesh became like a little boy's, and he was clean. Amen. Returning with his entire retinue to the man of Elohim, he stood before him and exclaimed, Now I know that there is no Elohim in the whole world except in Israel, so please accept the gift from your servant. But he replied, As our Father never lives, whom I serve, I will not accept anything. He pressed him to accept it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Then at least your servant be given to mule loads of earth. For your servant will never again offer a burnt offering or sacrifice to any mighty one, except our Father in heaven. But may our Father in heaven pardon your servant for this. When my master entered the temple of Ramon to bow low and worship there, and he is leaning on my arm so that I must bow low in the temple of Ramon. When I bow low in the temple of Ramon, may our Father in heaven pardon your servant in this. And he said to him, Go in peace. When he had gone some distance from him, Gehazi, the attendant of Elijah, the man of Elohim, Though my master has let that Aramean Naaman off without accepting what he brought. As thy father never lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi heard after Naaman. When Naaman saw someone running after him, he alighted from his chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" "All is well," he replied. "My master has sent me to say, to use disciples of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing." Naaman said, "Please take 2 talents." He urged him, and he wrapped the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags and gave them along with 2 changes of clothes. The 2 of his servants who carried them ahead of him. When Gehazi arrived at the citadel, he took the things from them and deposited them in the house. Then he dismissed the men, and they went their way. He entered and stood before his master. And Elijah said to him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" He replied, "Your servant has not gone anywhere." Then Elijah said to him, Did not my spirit go along when a man got down from his chariot to meet you? Did not my heart go along when a man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this a time to take money in order to buy clothing and olive groves and vineyards, sheep and oxen, and male and female slaves? Surely the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. And as Gehazi left his precincts, he was snow white with leprosy. The disciples of the prophets said to Elijah, "See, the place where we live under your direction is too cramped for us. Let us go to the Jordan, and let us each get a log there and build quarters there for ourselves to live in." "Do so," he replied. Then one of them said, "Will you please come along with your servants?" "Yes, I will come," he said, and he accompanied them. So they went to the Jordan and cut timber. As one of them was felling a truck, the iron axe head fell into the water, and he cried aloud, "Alas, master, it was a borrowed one." "Where did it fall?" asked the man of Elohim. He showed him the spot, and he cut off a stick and threw it in, and he made the axe head float. "Pick it up," he said. So he reached out and took it. While the king of Aram was waging war against Israel, he took counsel with his officers. He took counsel with his officers and said, "Unless you know that the prophets were just doing regular real life things like anybody else, And then this is a beautiful thing that happened. He's like, "Where did it fall?" He's like, "Ask the man of Elohim." He showed him the spot, and he cut off his stick and threw it in, and he made the axe head float. "Pick it up," he said. So he reached out and took it, just doing miracles on a regular day. While the king of Aram was waging war against Israel, he took counsel with his officers and said, "I will encamp in such a place." But the man of Elohim sent word to the king of Israel, "Take care not to pass through that place, for the Arameans are encamped there." So the king of Israel sent word to the place of which the man of Elohim had told him. Time and again he alerted such a place and took precautions there. Greatly agitated about this matter, the king of Aram summoned his officers and said to them, "Tell me, who of us is on the side of the king of Israel?" "No one, my master king," said one of the officers. "Elijah, that prophet in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go find out where he is," he said, "so that I can have him seized." It was reported to him that Elijah was in Dathan, so he sent horses and chariots there in a strong force. They arrived that night and encircled the town. When the attendant of the man of Elohim rose early and went outside, he saw a force with horses and chariots surrounding the town. "Alas, master, what shall we do?" his servant asked him. "Have no fear," he replied. There are more on our side than on theirs." Then Elijah prayed, "Our Father in heaven, open his eyes and let him see." And our Father in heaven opened the servant's eyes, and he saw the hills all around Elijah covered with horses and chariots of fire. The Arameans came down against him, and Elijah prayed to our Father in heaven, "Please strike this people with a blinding light." And he struck them with a blinding light, as Elijah had asked. Elijah said to them, "This is not the road, and that is not the town. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you want." And he led them to Samaria. When they entered Samaria, Elijah said, "Oh, our Father in heaven, open the eyes of these men so that they may see." Our Father in heaven opened their eyes, and they saw that they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elijah, "Father, shall I strike them down?" "No, do not," he replied. "Did you take them captive with your sword and vow that you would strike them down? Rather set foot and drink before them, and let them eat and drink and return to their master." So he prepared a lavish feast for them, and after they had eaten and drunk, he let them go, and they reported to them, and they returned to their master. And the Aramean band stopped invading the land of Israel. Sometime later, King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and marched upon Samaria and besieged it. There was a great famine in Samaria, and the siege continued until a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of kab of doves, dung for 5 shekels. Once, when the king of Israel was walking on the city wall, a woman cried out to him, "Help me, your majesty, don't ask me." He replied, "Let our Father in heaven help you. Where could I get help for you? From the threshing floor, or from the threshing floor, or from the winepress?" But what troubles you? The king asked her. The woman answered, that woman said to me, give up your son, and we will eat him today. He said, well, she said, tomorrow we eat my son. So we took my son and we ate him. The next day I said to her, give up your son and let's eat him. But she hid her son. When the king heard what the woman said, he rent his clothes, and as he walked along the wall, the people could see that he was wearing sackcloth underneath. He said, thus and more may Elohim do to me if the head of Elijah, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. Now Elijah was sitting at home. On his shoulders today. Now Elijah was sitting at home, and the elders were sitting with him. The king had sent ahead one of his men, but before the messenger arrived, Elijah said to the elders, do you see that murderer has sent someone to cut off my head? Watch when the messenger comes and shut the door and hold the door fast against him. No doubt the sound of his master's footsteps will follow. While he was still talking to them, the messenger came to him and said, this calamity is from our Father in heaven. What more can I hope for from our Father in heaven? And Elijah replied, hear the word of our Father in heaven. Thus said our Father in heaven, this time tomorrow a seah of choice flour shall sell for a shekel at the gate of Samaria, and two seahs of barley for a shekel. The aide on whose arm the king was leaning spoke up and said to the men of Elohim, even if our Father in heaven were to make windows in the sky, could this come to pass? And he retorted, you shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it. There were 4 men lepers outside the gate. They said to one another, why should we sit here waiting for death? If we decide to go into the town, what with the famine in the town? We shall die there. And if we just sit here, still we die. Come, let us desert to the Aramean camp. If they let us live, we shall live. And if they put us to death, we shall but die. They set out at twilight for the Aramean camp. But when they came to the edge of the Aramean camp, there was no one there, for our Father in heaven had caused the Aramean camp to hear a sound of chariots, a sound of horses, the din of a huge army. They said to one another, the king of Israel must have hired the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Mizraim to attack us. And they fled headlong in the twilight, abandoning their tents and horses and donkeys, the entire camp just as it was as they fled for their lives. When those lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into one of the tents and ate and drank. Then they carried off silver and gold and clothing from there and buried it. They came back and went into another tent, and they carried off what was there and buried it. Then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping silent. If we wait until the light of morning, we shall incur guilt. Come, let us go in and inform the king's palace. They went and called out to the gatekeepers of the city and told them, we have been to the Aramean camp. There is not a soul there, nor any human sound, but the horses are tethered and the donkeys are tethered and the tents are undisturbed. The gatekeepers called out, and the news was passed on into the king's palace. The king rose in the night and said to his courtiers, I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know that we are starving, so they have gone out of camp and hidden in the fields, thinking when they come out of the town, we would take them alive and get into the town. But one of the courtiers spoke up, let a few of the remaining horses that are still here be taken. They are like those that are left here of the whole multitude of Israel, out of the whole multitude of Israel that have perished. And let us send and find out. They took 2 teams of horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army, saying, go and find out. They followed them as far as the Jordan and found the entire road full of clothing and gear, which the Arameans had thrown away in their haste. And the messengers returned and told the king. The people then went out and plundered the Aramean camp. So a seah of choice flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel, as our Father in heaven had spoken. That the king had put the aide on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and he was trampled to death in the gate by the people, just as the man of Elohim had spoken, as he had spoken when the king came down to him. For when the man of Elohim said to the king, this time tomorrow 2 seahs of barley shall sell at the gate of Samaria for a shekel, and a seah of choice flour for a shekel. The aide answered the man of Elohim and said, even if our Father in heaven made windows in the sky, could this come to pass? And he retorted, you shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it. That is exactly what happened to him. The people trampled him to death in the gate. Elijah had said to the woman, Elijah had said to the woman whose son he revived, leave immediately with your family and go sojourn somewhere else, for our Father in heaven has decreed a 7-year famine upon the land, and it has already begun. The woman had done as the man of Elohim had spoken. She left with her family and sojourned in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines and went to the king to complain about her house and farm. Now the king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of Elohim, and he said, "Tell me all the wonderful things that Elijah has done." While he was telling the king how Elijah had revived the dead person, and in came the woman whose son he had revived, complaining to the king about her house and farm. My master king said, Gehazi, this is the woman, and this is her son whom Elijah revived. The king questioned the woman, and she told him the story. So the king assigned a eunuch to her and instructed him to restore all her property and all the revenue from her farm from the time she left the country until now. Elijah arrived in Damascus at a time when King Ben-Hadad of Aram was ill. The king was told the man of Elohim was on his way here, and he said to Hazael, "Take a gift with you and go meet the man of Elohim, and through him inquire of our Father in heaven. Will I recover from this illness?" Hazael went to meet him, taking with him as a gift 40 camel loads of all the bounty of Damascus. He came and stood before him and said, "Your son King Ben-Hadad of Aram has sent me to you to ask, will I recover from this illness?" Elijah said to him, "Go and say to him, you will recover. However, our Father in heaven has revealed to me that he would die." The man of Elohim kept his face expressionless for a long time, and then he wept. "Why does my master weep?" asked Hazael. "Because I know," he replied, "what harm you would do to the Israelite people. You would set their fortresses on fire, put their young men to the sword, dash their little ones in pieces, and rip open their pregnant women. But how," asked Hazael, "can your servant who was a mere dog perform such a mighty deed?" Elijah replied, "Our Father in heaven has shown me a vision of you as king of Aram." He left Elijah and returned to his master, who asked him, "What did Elijah say to you?" He replied, "He told me that you would recover the next day." Hazael took a piece of netting, dipped it in water, and spread it over his face. So Ben-Hadad died, and Hazael succeeded him as king. In the 5th year of King Yoram, son of Ahab of Israel, Jehoshaphat had been king of Yehuda. Yoram, son of King Jehoshaphat of Yehuda, became king. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He followed the practices of the kings of Israel, whatever the house of Ahab did, for he had married a daughter of Ahab, and he did what was displeasing to our Father in heaven. However, our Father in heaven refrained from destroying Yehuda for the sake of his servant David, in accordance with his promise to maintain a lamp for his descendants for all time during his reign. The Edomites rebelled against Yehuda's rule and set up a king of their own. Yoram crossed over to Zaire with all his chariotry. He arose by night and attacked the Edomites who were surrounding him and the chariot commanders, but his troops fled to their homes. Thus Edom fell away from Yehuda, as is still the case. Lebanon likewise fell away at that time. The other events of Yoram's reign and all his actions are recorded in the annals of the kings of Yehuda. Yoram slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. His son Ahijah succeeded him as a king. In the 12th year of King Yoram, son of Ahab of Israel, Ahijah, son of Jeroboam, became king of Yehuda. Ahijah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, daughter of King Omri of Israel. He walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, and did what was displeasing to our Father in heaven, like the house of Ahab, for he was related by marriage to the house of Ahab. He marched with Yoram, son of Ahab, to battle against King Hazael of Aram at Ramoth Gilead, but the Arameans wounded Yoram. King Yoram retired to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Arameans had inflicted upon him at Ramah. When he fought against King Hazael of Aram, and King Ahazah, son of Yoram of Judah, went down to Jezreel to visit Yoram, son of Ahab, while he was ill. Then the prophet Elijah summoned one of the disciples of the prophets and said to him, "Tie up your skirts and take along this flask of oil and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you arrive there, go and see Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshai. Get him to leave his comrades and take him into an inner room. Then take the flask of oil and pour some on his head, and say, Thus said our Father in heaven, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee without delay." The young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived, the army commanders were sitting together. He said, "Commander, I have a message for you. For which one of us?" Jehu asked. He answered, "For you, Commander." So Jehu arose and went inside, and the disciple poured the oil on his head and said to him, "Thus said our Father in heaven, the Elohim of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of our Father in heaven. Over Israel you shall strike down the house of Ahab, your master. Thus will I avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of the other servants of our Father in heaven. The whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off every male belonging to Ahab bond and free in Israel will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha son of Ahiah. The dog shall devour Jezebel in the field of Jezreel with none to bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. Jehu went out to the other officers of his master, and they asked him, "Is all well? What did that madman come to you for?" He said to them, "You know the man and his ranting. You're lying." They said, "Tell us the truth." Then he replied, "Thus and thus he said, Thus said our Father in heaven, I anoint you king over Israel." Quickly each man took his cloak and placed it under him on the top step. They sounded the horn and proclaimed Jehu as king. Thus Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Dimshah, conspired against Joram. You see, it says conspire, conspiracy with real. Joram and all Israel, we hear that word a lot. We see that a lot. Joram and all Israel had been defending Ramoth Gilead against King Hazael of Aram. But King Joram, but just don't get fed into endless ideologies. But King Joram had gone back to Israel to recover from the wounds which the Arameans had inflicted on him in his battle. And that takes discernment, get wisdom and understanding, brothers and sisters. But King Joram, in legend, if you're watching this, get wisdom and understanding, bro. Go and read more, go and listen more, listen to this. It's beautiful to listen to. It's the scriptures. Go and read this and get wisdom and understanding, fast and pray. If you're at the age to where you can do that now. But King Joram had gone back to Israel to recover from the wounds which the Arameans had inflicted on him in his battle with King Hazael of Aram. Jehu said, "If such is your hope, allow no one to slip out of the town to go and report this in Jezreel." Then Jehu mounted his chariot and drove to Jezreel, for Joram was lying ill there. The king Ahijah of Yehuda had gone down to visit Joram. The lookout was stationed on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the troop of Jehu. As he approached, he called out, "I see a troop." Joram said, "Dispatch a horseman to meet them. Let him ask us all well." The horseman went to meet him, and he said, "The king inquires, is all well?" Jehu replied, What concern of yours is it whether all is well?" Following behind me, the lookout reported, "The messenger has reached them, but has not turned back." So he sent out a second horseman. He came to them and said, "Thus says the king, is all well?" Jehu answered, "What concern of yours is it whether all is well?" Following behind me, and the lookout reported, "The messenger has reached them, but has not turned back." And it looks like the driving of Jehu, son of Nimshai, who drives wildly. Joram ordered to hitch up the chariot. They hitched up his chariot, and King Joram of Israel and King Ahijah of Yehuda went out, each in his own chariot, to meet Jehu. They met him at the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, "Is all well, Jehu?" But Jehu replied, How can all be well as long as your mother Jezebel carries on her countless harlotries and sorceries?" Thereupon Joram turned his horses around and fled, crying out to Ahijah, treason, Ahijah. But Jehu drew his bow and hit Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart and he collapsed in his chariot. Jehu thereupon ordered his officer Bidkar, pick him up and throw him into the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding side by side beside his father Ahab, and our father never made the pronouncement about him. That's why I have taken note of the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons yesterday, declares our Father in heaven. And I will requite you in this plot, declares our Father in heaven. So pick him up and throw him into the plot in accordance with the word of our Father in heaven. On seeing this, King Ahijah of Jehuda fled along the road to Beth Hagan. Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him down too." And they shot him in the chariot at the exit of Gur, which is near Abalam. He fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants conveyed him in a chariot to Jerusalem, and they buried him in his grave with his fathers in the city of David. Ahijah had become king over Jehuda in the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab. Jehu went out to Jezreel. When Jezebel heard of it, she painted her eyes with kohl and dressed her hair, and she looked out of the window. As Jehu entered the gate, she called out, "Is all well, Zimri, murderer of your master?" He looked up toward the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 eunuchs leaned out toward him to throw her down. He said, They threw her down, and her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled her. Then he went inside and ate and drank, and he said, "Attend to that cursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." So they went to bury her, but all they found of her were the skull, the feet, and the hands. They came back and reported to him, and he said, "It is just as our father had spoke to his servant Elijah. Tishba, the dog shall devour the flesh of Jezebel in the field of Jezreel, and the carcass of Jezebel shall be like dung on the ground in the field of Jezreel, so that none will be able to say this with Jezebel." Hold on, let me turn this fan on. Let's get I could already be cold outside. Ahab had 70 descendants in Samaria. Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria to the elders and officials of Jezreel and to the guardians of the children of Ahab as follows. Now, when this letter reaches you, since your master's sons are with you, and you also have chariots and horses, and a fortified city and weapons, select the best and the most suitable of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they were overcome by fear, for they thought, if the two kings could not stand up to him, how can we, the steward of the palace and the governor of the city, and the elders and the guardians, sent this message to Jehu? We are your subjects, and we shall do whatever you tell us to do. We shall not proclaim anyone king. Do whatever you like. He wrote them a second time, if you are on my side and are ready to obey me, take the heads of the attendants of your master's sons and come to me in Jezreel tomorrow at this time. Now the princes, 70 in number, were with the notables of the town, who were rearing them. But when the letter reached them, they took the princes and slaughtered all 70 of them. They put their heads in baskets and sent them to him in Jezreel. A messenger came and reported to him, they have brought the heads of the princes. He said, pile them up into heaps at the entrance of the gate before morning. In the morning he went out and stood there, and he said to all the people, Are you blameless? True, I conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all of these? Know then that nothing that our Father in heaven has spoken concerning the house of Ahab shall remain unfulfilled. For our Father in heaven has done what he announced through his servant Elijah. And Jehu struck down all that were left of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his notables, intimates, and priests, till he left him no survivor. He then set out for Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu came upon the kinsman of King Ahaziah of Yehudah. Who are you? He asked. They replied, We are the kinsmen of Ahaziah, and we have come to pay our respects to the sons of the king and the sons of the queen mother. Take them alive, he said. They took them alive and then slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Eked. 42 of them. He did not spare a single one. He went out from there, and he met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, coming toward him. He greeted him and said to him, Are you as wholehearted with me as I am with you? I am Jehonadab, replied. If so, said Jehu, Give me your hand. He gave him his hand. And Jehu helped him into the chariot. Come with me, he said, and see my zeal for our Father in heaven. And he was taken along in the chariot, arriving in Samaria. Jehu struck down all the survivors of the house of Ahab in Samaria until he wiped it out, fulfilling the word that our Father in heaven had spoken to Elijah. Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, Ahab served Baal little, Baal shall serve him much. Therefore summon to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, and all his priests. Let no one fail to come, for I am going to hold a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever fails to come shall forfeit his life. Jehu was acting with guile in order to exterminate the worshippers of Baal. Jehu gave orders to convoke a solemn assembly for Baal, and one was proclaimed. Jehu sent word throughout Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came. Not a single one remained behind. They came into the temple of Baal, and the temple of Baal was filled from end to end. He said to the man in charge of the wardrobe, Bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal. And he brought the vestments out for them. Then Jehu and Jehonadab, son of Rechab, came into the temple of Baal. And they said to the worshippers of Baal, Search and make sure that there are no worshippers of our Father in heaven among you, but only worshippers of Baal. So they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. But Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside, and had said, Whoever permits the escape of a single one of the men I commit to your charge shall forfeit life for life. When Jehu had finished presenting the burnt offering, he said to the guards and to the officers, Come in and strike them down. Let no man get away. The guards and the officers struck them down with the sword and left them lying where they were. Then they proceeded to the interior of the temple of Baal. They brought out the pillars of the temple of Baal and burned them. They destroyed the pillars of Baal, and they tore down the temple of Baal and turned it into latrines, as is still the case. Then Jehu eradicated the Baal from Israel. However, Jehu did not turn away from the sinful objects by which Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to sin, namely the golden calves at Bethel and at Dan. Our father never said to Jehu, Because you have acted well and done what was pleasing to me, and having carried out all that I desired upon the house of Ahab, 4 generations of your descendants shall occupy the throne of Israel. But Jehu was not careful to follow the teaching of our father in heaven, the Elohim of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sins that Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. In those days, our father in heaven began to reduce Israel, and Hazael harassed them throughout the territory of Israel, east of the Jordan, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the Manassites, from Aroer by the Wadi Aranon up to Gilead and Bashan. The other events of Jehu's reign The other events of Jehu's reign and all his actions and all his exploits are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Jehu slept with his fathers, and he was buried in Samaria, and he was succeeded as king by his son Jehoaz. Jehu reigned over Israel for 28 years in Samaria. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahijah, learned that her son was dead, she promptly killed off all who were of royal stock. But Yehosheba, daughter of King Aram and sister of Uzziah, secretly took Ahijah's son Joash away from among the princes who were being slain and put him and his nurse in a bedroom, and they kept him hidden from Athaliah so that he was not put to death. He stayed with her for 6 years, hidden in the house of our Father in heaven, while Athaliah reigned over the land. In the 7th year, Joiada sent for the chiefs of the hundreds of the Kerites and of the guards, and had them come to him in the house of our Father in heaven. He made a pact with them, exacting an oath from them in the house of our Father in heaven, and he showed them the king's son. He instructed them, "This is what you must do. 1/3 of those who are on duty for the week shall maintain guard over the royal palace. Another third shall be stationed at the Sur gate, and the other third shall be at the gate behind the guards. You shall keep guard over the house on every side. The 2 divisions of yours who are off duty this week shall keep guard over the house of our Father in heaven for the protection of the king. You shall surround the king on every side, every man with his weapons at the ready, and whoever breaks through the ranks shall be killed. Stay close to the king in his comings and goings." The chiefs of hundreds did just as Jehoiada ordered. Each took his men, those who were on duty that week and those who were off duty that week, and they presented themselves to Joiada the priest. The priest gave the chiefs of hundreds came that with spears and quivers that were kept in the house of our Father in heaven. The guards, each with his weapons at the ready, stationed themselves from the south end of the house to the north end of the house, at the altar and the house, to guard the king on every side. Jehoiada then brought out the king's son and placed upon him the crown and the insignia. They anointed him and proclaimed him king. They clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" When Athaliah heard the shouting of the guards and the people, she came out to the people in the house of our Father in heaven. She looked about and saw the king standing by the pillar, as was the custom, the chiefs with their trumpets beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Athaliah rent her garments and cried out, "Treason, treason!" Then the priest Jehoiada gave the command to the army officers, the chiefs of hundreds, and said to them, "Take her out between the ranks, and if anyone follows her, put him to the sword." For the priest thought, "Let her not be put to death in the house of our Father in heaven." They cleared a passageway for her, and she entered the royal palace through the horses' entrance. There she was put to death. And Jehoiada solemnized the covenant between our Father in heaven on the one hand and the king and the people on the other, as well as between the king and the people, that they should be the people of our Father in heaven. Thereupon all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal. They tore it down and smashed its altars and images to bits, and they slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada, the priest, then placed guards over the house of our Father in heaven. He took the chiefs of hundreds, the Kerites, the guards, and all the people of the land, and they escorted the king from the house of our Father in heaven into the royal palace by the gate of the guards, and he attended the royal throne. All the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. As for Athaliah, she had been put to the sword in the royal palace. Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. Joash began his reign in the 7th year of Yehud, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Abiah of Beersheba. All his days Joash did what was pleasing to our Father in heaven. I was about to say, I know for sure he did what was pleasing to our Father in heaven, because I remember him. As the priest Jehoiada restructured him, the shrines, however, were not removed. You listen, legend, if you read it. If you're listening to this, listen. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. Joash began his reign in the 7th year of Yehud, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Zabiah of Beersheba. All his days, Joash did what was pleasing to our Father in heaven. As the priest Jehoiada instructed him, the shrines, however, were not removed. The people continued to sacrifice and offer at the shrines. Joash said to the priest, "All the money, current money, brought into the house of our Father in heaven as sacred donations, any money a man may pay as the money equivalent of persons, or any other money that a man may be minded to bring to the house of our Father in heaven, let the priest receive it, each from his benefactor. Then they in turn shall make repairs on the house wherever damage may be found. But in the 23rd year of King Joash, it was found that the priests had not made the repairs on the house. So King Joash summoned the priest Jehoiada and the other priests and said to them, "Why have you not kept the house in repair? Now do not accept money from your benefactors anymore, but have it donated for the repair of the house." The priests agreed that they would neither accept money from the people nor make repairs in the house. And the priest Jehoiada took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it in the right side of the altar as one entered the house of our Father in heaven. And the priestly guards of the threshold deposited there all the money that was brought into the house of our Father in heaven. Whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, the royal scribe and the high priest would come up and put the money accumulated in the house of our Father in heaven into bags, and they would count it. Then they would deliver the money that was weighed out to the overseers of the work, who were in charge of the house of our Father in heaven. These in turn used to pay the carpenters and the laborers who worked on the house of our Father in heaven, and the masons and the stone cutters. They also paid for wood and clay shovels which to make the repairs on the house of our Father in heaven, and for every other expenditure that had to be made in repairing the house. However, no silver bowls and no snuffers, basins, or trumpets, no vessels of gold or silver were made at the house of our Father in heaven. From the money brought into the house of our Father in heaven, this was given only to the overseers of the work for the repair of the house of our Father in heaven. No check was kept on the men to whom the money was delivered to pay the workers, but they dealt honestly. Money brought as a guilt offering or as a sin offering was not deposited in the house of our Father in heaven. It went to the priests. At that time, King Hazael of Aram came up and attacked God and captured it, and Hazael proceeded to march on Jerusalem. Thereupon King Joash of Judah took all the objects that had been consecrated by his fathers, King Jehoshaphat, Joram, and Ahijah of Judah, and by himself, and all the gold that there was in the treasuries of the temple of our Father in heaven in the royal palace. And he sent them to King Hazael of Aram, who then turned back from his march on Jerusalem. The other events of Joash's reign and all his actions are recorded in the annals of the kings of Judah. His courtiers formed a conspiracy against Joash and assassinated him at Beth Milo, that leads down to Silla. The courtiers who assassinated him were Yozakar, son of Shemath, and Jehozabad, son of Shomer. He died and was buried with his fathers in the city of Dawid. His son Amizah succeeded him as king in the 23rd year of King Joash, son of Ahijah of Judah. Joash, son of Jehu, became king over Israel and Samaria. For 17 years he did what was displeasing to our Father in heaven. He persisted in the sins which Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit. He did not depart from them. Our Father in heaven was angry with Israel, and he repeatedly delivered them into the hands of King Hazael of Aram and into the hands of Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael. But Joahaz pleaded with our Father in heaven, and our Father in heaven listened to him, for he saw the suffering that the king of Aram inflicted upon Israel. So our Father in heaven granted Israel a deliverer, and they gained their freedom from Aram. And Israel dwelt in his homes as before. However, they did not depart from the sins which the house of Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. They persisted in them. Even the sacred post stood in Samaria. In fact, Joahaz was left with a force of only 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers, for the king of Aram had decimated them and trampled them like the dust under his feet. The other events of Jehoahaz's reign and all his actions and his exploits are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Jehoash slept with his fathers, and he was buried in Samaria. His son Joash succeeded him as king. In the 37th year of King Joash of Jehudah, Joash, son of Joashah, Jehoahaz became king of Israel in Samaria for 16 years. He did what was displeasing to our Father in heaven. He did not depart from any of the sins which Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit. He persisted in them. The other events of Joash's reign and all his actions and his exploits in his war with King Amizah of Jehudah are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Joash slept with his fathers in Jeroboam, accompanying his throne. Joash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Elijah had been stricken with the illness of which he was to die, and King Joash of Israel went down to see him. He wept over him and cried, "Father, Father, Israel's chariots and horsemen." Elijah said to him, "Get a bow and arrows." And he brought him a bow and arrows. Then he said to the king of Israel, "Grasp the bow." And when he grasped it, Elijah put his hands over the king's hands, opened the window toward the east. He said, and he opened it. Elijah said, "Shoot," and he shot. Then he said, "An arrow of victory for our Father in heaven, an arrow of victory over Aram. We shall rout Aram completely at effect." He said, "Now pick up the arrows." And he picked them up, strike the ground. He said to the king of Israel, and he struck 3 times to stop. The man of Elohim was angry with him and said to him, "If only you had struck 5 or 6 times, then you would have annihilated Aram. As it is, you shall defeat Aram only 3 times." Elijah died and he was buried. Now bands of Moabites used to invade the land at the coming of every year. Once a man was being buried, once a man was being buried, when the people caught sight of such a band, so they drew the corpse up into Elijah's grave and made off. When the dead man came in contact with Elijah's bones, he came to life and stood up. King Hazael of Aram had oppressed the Israelites throughout the... Wow, it says, when the dead man came in contact with Elijah's bones, he came to life. Once a man was being buried, when the people caught sight of such a band, so they threw the corpse into Elijah's grave and made off. When the dead man came in contact with Elijah's bones, he came to life and stood up. That is amazing. Amen. King Hazael of Aram had oppressed the Israelites throughout the reign of Jehoahaz, but our Father in heaven was gracious and merciful to them. And he turned back to them, and he turned back to them for the sake of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He refrained from destroying them, and he still did not cast them out from his presence. When King Hazael of Aram died, his son Ben-Hadad succeeded him as king. And then Joash, son of Jehoahaz, recovered from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns which had been taken from his father Jehoahaz in war 3 times. Joash defeated him, and he recovered the towns of Israel. In the second year of King Joash, son of Jehoahaz of Israel, Amaziah, son of King Joash of Jehudah, became king. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jehoadan of Jerusalem. He did what was pleasing to our Father in heaven, but not like his ancestor David. He did just as his father Joash had done. However, the shrines were not removed. The people continued to sacrifice and make offerings at the shrines. Once he had the kingdom firmly in his grasp, he put to death the courtiers who had assassinated his father the king, but he did not put to death the children of the assassins in accordance with what is written in the book of the teaching of Moshe. Where our Father never commanded, parents shall not be put to death for children, nor children be put to death for parents. A person shall be put to death only for his own crime. He defeated 10,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt, and he captured Selah in battle and renamed it Joktheel, as is still the case. Then Amaziah sent envoys to King Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, son of Jehu of Israel, with this message: "Come, let us confront each other." King Joash of Israel sent back this message to King Amaziah of Judah. The thistle in Lebanon sent this message to the cedar in Lebanon: "Give your daughter to my son in marriage." But a wild beast in Lebanon went by and trampled down the thistle. Because you have defeated Edom, you have become arrogant. Stay home and enjoy your glory rather than provoke disaster and fall, dragging Jehudah down with you. But Amaziah paid no heed, so King Jehoash of Israel advanced, and he and King Amaziah of Jehudah confronted each other at Beth Shemesh. And Jehudah, the Judites, were routed by Israel, and they all fled to their homes. King Joash, son of Ahaziah of Israel, captured King Amaziah, son of Joash, son of Ahaziah, of Jehudah at Beth Shemesh. He marched on Jerusalem, and he made a breach of 400 cubits in the wall of Jerusalem from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate. He carried off all the gold and silver and all the vessels that were in the house of our Father in heaven and in the treasuries of the royal palace, as well as hostages, and he returned to Samaria. The other events of Joash's reign and all of the counts and exploits in his war with King Amaziah of Jehudah are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Jehoash slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. His son Jeroboam succeeded him as king. King Amaziah, king of Joash of Jehudah, lived 15 years after the death of King Joash, son of Jehoash of Israel. The other events of Amaziah's reign are recorded in the annals of the kings of Yehudah. A conspiracy was formed against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But they sent men after him to Lachish, and they killed him there. They brought back his body on horses, and he was buried with his fathers in Jerusalem in the city of David. Then all the people of Jehudah took Azariah, who was 16 years old, and proclaimed him king to succeed his father Amaziah. It was he who rebuilt Elath and restored it to Jehudah after King Amaziah slept with his fathers. In the 15th year, King Amaziah, son of Joash, son of Jehudah, King Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel, became king of Samaria. For 41 years he did what was displeasing to our Father in heaven. He did not depart from all the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit. It was he who restored the territory of Israel from Lebo Hamath to the sea of the Arabah, in accordance with the promise that our Father in heaven, the Elohim of Israel, had made through his servant the prophet Jonah, son of Amittai from Gath Heber. And for our Father in heaven saw the very bitter blight. in accordance with the promise that our father in heaven, that Elohim Israel had made through his servant the prophet Jonah, son of Amittai from Gath Hefer. For our father never saw the very bitter plight of Israel, with neither bond nor free left, and with none to help Israel. And our father never resolved not to blot out the name of Israel from under heaven. And he delivered them through Jeroboam, son of Joash. The other events of Jeroboam's reign and all his actions and exploits, how he fought and recovered Damascus and Hamath for Jehudah and Israel, are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Jeroboam slept with his fathers, the kings of Israel, and his son Zechariah succeeded him as king. So may our Father and the Son and the Spirit be with us. Father willing, we will finish up 2 Kings tomorrow. I pray that you all are well, and I pray that you all have a wonderful, beautiful, and blessed day. Honestly, can't wait to get to the book of Isaiah and the book of Jeremiah, and to get to the book of the prophets. I already know that's just going to be very, very edifying for me, very, very edifying for the body. Pretty much after that, it's just like the rest of these books are like really, really short, you know. Yeah. Let's get it. Yeah, Father, the Son, and the Spirit with us. Man.